A family loses 90% of its wealth by the third generation. That's not a guess. That's the pattern, repeated so often that wealth advisors have a name for it. Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The grandfather builds the fortune. The son maintains it. The grandson loses it. And yet, somehow, a small number of families break this rule completely. The Rothschilds have stayed wealthy for over 200 years. The Rockefellers are still wealthy 6 generations later. So, what do they know that everyone else doesn't? Most people assume the answer is simple. They just made more money than everyone else, so there was more to go around. But that explanation falls apart the moment you look closely. Plenty of families have made fortunes just as large, sometimes larger, and still watched it evaporate within a lifetime. The money isn't the variable, something else is. Here's what most people believe instead. Rich families stay rich because they pass down money. A big inheritance, a trust fund, a check with a lot of zeros? Sounds obvious. It's also almost completely wrong. Money on its own is fragile. It gets spent, mismanaged, divided, taxed, and lost. What ultra-wealthy families actually pass down isn't money. It's a structure. And that structure is designed to survive the one thing that destroys almost every fortune: the humans who inherit it. Think about what happens to a normal inheritance. A parent dies, the estate gets divided among the children, and each child now controls their own slice. One child is careful, one child is generous to a fault. One child trusts the wrong business partner. Within a decade, 3 different decisions have pulled the fortune in 3 different directions, and none of them are working together anymore. Ultra-wealthy families solve this with something most people have never even heard of: the dynasty trust. Instead of handing wealth directly to children, the money goes into a legal structure that can last for generations, sometimes indefinitely. The family doesn't own the money anymore, the trust owns it. The family members are simply beneficiaries receiving income and support, while the core fortune stays locked away from divorce settlements, bad business deals, lawsuits, and impulsive spending. It's the financial version of a family building a fortress instead of just stacking gold in a room. The gold can be stolen. The fortress protects itself. This alone would explain a lot, but it still isn't the full picture. Because a trust only protects money from mistakes, it doesn't create more of it. So, how do these families keep growing their wealth across generations instead of just preserving it? The answer sits inside a strategy quietly used by nearly every major dynasty. Never sell, never realize the gain, just borrow against it. Picture a founder who owns a huge stake in a company. If they sell shares to fund their lifestyle, they trigger a massive tax bill and shrink their ownership. So instead, they don't sell. They borrow money from a bank, using their shares as collateral. The loan gives them cash to live on. The shares stay untouched, still growing, still compounding. And crucially, the loan isn't taxed as income because it isn't income. It's debt. This is often called the buy, borrow, die strategy, and it's one of the quietest wealth preservation tools in existence. Buy assets that grow, borrow against them instead of selling them. And when the original owner dies in many tax systems, the asset's value resets for the heirs, erasing decades of gains that would otherwise have been taxed. The fortune doesn't just survive the transfer to the next generation. In some cases, it gets a tax advantage from the transfer itself. It sounds almost too clean, which is exactly why most people never learn it exists. This isn't a secret because it's illegal. It's a secret because it requires a level of financial literacy that almost nobody is taught. And that's the deeper truth hiding underneath all of this. Trusts and borrowing strategies are just tools. Tools don't matter if the person holding them doesn't know how to use them. The real inheritance in these families isn't the structure. It's the education that comes before it. Wealthy families don't wait until the will is read to teach their children about money. Many start decades earlier, treating financial literacy the way other families treat learning to read. Children sit in on meetings with accountants. They're taught what a balance sheet means before they're taught how to drive. They grow up watching how decisions get made, not just what decisions were made. By the time real money arrives, they've already had years of low-stakes practice. Compare that to how most people experience money. Financial decisions arrive as emergencies, a sudden inheritance, a first big paycheck, a mortgage application. There's no rehearsal. The first time the stakes are real is often the first time anyone's actually paying attention, and by then, expensive mistakes are already being made in real time. There's a quiet psychological trick hiding in all of this too, and it explains why so many lottery winners and one generation fortunes disintegrate so fast. Money that arrives suddenly feels unreal. Behavioral researchers have long noted that people treat windfall money differently than earned money, spending it faster and with less caution, almost like it was never truly theirs to begin with. Multi-generational families short-circuit this entirely because the wealth was never a windfall. It was simply the water the child grew up swimming in. There's no emotional shock to trigger reckless behavior because there was never a moment of sudden arrival. So the pattern becomes clear. It isn't the size of the fortune that determines whether it survives, it's whether the family builds three things around it: a legal structure that protects the money from human error, a financial strategy that lets the wealth keep compounding instead of being consumed, and an education system that prepares the next generation before the money ever reaches their hands. Take away any one of these, and the whole system tends to collapse eventually. Money without structure gets divided and drained. Structure without education gets mismanaged by people who never learn to use it. And education without money to practice on is just theory. This is why most attempts to build generational wealth fail quietly, even when the first generation does everything right. They focus entirely on making the money and almost nothing on building the system around it. It's the equivalent of building a beautiful house with no foundation and being surprised when it doesn't survive the first storm. The families who break the three-generation curse aren't smarter about making money. They're smarter about making money outlive them. And once you see the system behind it, you start to realize that wealth was never really about the number in the account. It was always about the structure holding it together long after the person who built it is gone. If this changed the way you think about money and family, you know what to do. And here's a question worth sitting with. If you built real wealth tomorrow, would you know how to make it outlast you?